Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are untangling two of the absolute most critical and honestly most frequently confused concepts in accounting: business risk and audit risk. By the time we wrap this up, you're going to have a razor-sharp framework for tackling those massive, complex case studies. And the secret? It all comes down to knowing exactly which hat you're wearing at any given time. So let's just dive right in.
Think about this provocative question for a second. If a huge mega-corporation suddenly files for bankruptcy, the public almost immediately points a finger at the auditors, shouting, "Hey, where were they? Did the auditor fail?" But here is the truly fascinating reality. A company failing, that is a realization of business risk, which is fundamentally different from an audit failure. An auditor can do a completely flawless audit, issue the absolutely correct opinion, and the company could literally still go bankrupt the very next month. Understanding exactly why that's true is your key to mastering this entire topic.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with navigating uncertainty. Then we'll get into business risk explained, break down the audit risk model, walk through some real-world scenarios, and finally, look at common student mistakes. All right, Section 1, Navigating Uncertainty. Let's talk about the need for trust.
You see, every single day, organizations face just constant uncertainty. Let's use a great real-world example from our source material. Imagine Intabalaj wants to get a big loan from Big Money Bank. Naturally, the bank needs financial information to make their decision, right? But Big Money Bank also knows that Intabalaj's management might, have a little natural bias to make their financial statements look as rosy as possible to actually secure that cash. So there is a trust gap, and this is exactly where independent assurance comes into play. The auditor steps in to act as that independent bridge, enhancing the degree of confidence the bank can actually have in those numbers.
Moving right along to Section 2, Business Risk Explained, or as I like to call it, the CEO's headache. Okay, here's the formal academic definition. Business risk is a risk resulting from significant conditions, events, circumstances, actions, or inactions that could adversely affect an entity's ability to achieve its objectives and execute its strategies. Now, putting the textbook jargon aside, simply put, this is the stuff that keeps the CEO and the board of directors awake at 3 in the morning, right? Will our new product flop? Is our supply chain going to collapse? Are we going to run out of cash? Business risk literally threatens the actual operational survival of the company itself. And these risks, they come from absolutely everywhere, both external market forces and internal strategic choices. Think about some classic examples. A sudden economic downturn might completely crush consumer spending. Or take a company like Globalized Ltd. They face massive external foreign exchange exposures, while simultaneously trying to deal with internal supply chain failures or, say, technological disruption. Ultimately, these are operational, strategic, and financial market challenges. They are fundamentally business problems.
Now, what's really interesting here is a specific quote from the King IV Code on Corporate Governance. It states that the governing bodies should exercise ongoing oversight of risk management. The absolute crucial takeaway here is ownership. Management and the board of directors own business risk, period. It is their job to identify it, mitigate it, accept it, or avoid it. It is absolutely not the auditor's job to manage the company's business risks. The auditor is just an independent observer watching how management handles these storms.
Which brings us to Section 3, the audit risk model. Let's look at the auditor's dilemma. This comparison perfectly illustrates the dual perspective that you really need to master. Take a single real-world event. Let's say a warehouse completely burns down. Management's concern is purely a business risk. They're panicking, asking, how do we fulfill customer orders tomorrow? How do we afford to replace the building? But the auditor, they look at the exact same fire, and their concern is strictly an audit risk. They're thinking, okay, are the destroyed assets written off correctly in the financials? Is the expected insurance payout recorded accurately? It's the exact same event viewed through completely different lenses. The auditor only cares about the financial reporting of the event, not the operational nightmare it caused.
And that leads us straight to the formal definition from ISA 200. Audit risk is the risk that the auditor expresses an inappropriate audit opinion when the financial statements are materially misstated. So, in plain English, it's the risk that the auditor signs off on the financials, stamps them saying everything is fairly presented, when in reality, there are massive hidden errors or frauds lurking in the numbers. Honestly, that is an auditor's absolute worst nightmare.
To manage this nightmare, auditors rely on a very specific formula, and there are exactly 3 crucial components that make up this overall audit risk model.
Let's break them down. Audit risk equals inherent risk,
multiplied by control risk, multiplied by detection risk. First up, inherent risk. Think of this as the built-in susceptibility to misstatement, before you even look at any controls. Our sources use a fantastic analogy for this. Imagine auditing an inventory of diamonds versus an inventory of cricket bats. A diamond is highly susceptible to theft and incredibly difficult to value, right? Is it a real diamond or is it glass? That is super high inherent risk. But a cricket bat? Well, it's just a cricket bat. Second, we have control risk. This is the risk that the company's own internal controls, like say a monthly bank reconciliation, just fail to catch an error. And third is detection risk. This is the risk that the auditor's own procedures fail to detect a material misstatement. And here is the big secret. Detection risk is literally the only variable the auditor can actively control. If inherent and control risks are sky high, the auditor just has to do more rigorous, aggressive testing to force detection risk down, which keeps the overall audit risk at a safe, acceptable level.
Okay, let's move into Section 4, Real-World Audit Scenarios, and start connecting the dots.
I want you to think of the relationship between these risks like a giant funnel or filter. First, by understanding the client, the auditor identifies a massive business risk swirling out there in the market. Step 2, they ask the critical question. How does this actually impact the financial statements? Step 3, they determine the specific audit risk. That's the single drop of material misstatement risk that drips out the bottom of the funnel. And finally, Step 4, they design audit procedures specifically to test that risk. Let's look at a couple of concrete examples to see this in action.
Consider a case study featuring a tech retailer we'll call Cell Talk. The market event here is that cell phone technology changes incredibly fast, so their business risk is that they get stuck with warehouses full of outdated phone models, losing sales and bleeding money. But remember the filter. How does that actually hit the financials? The specific audit risk is that the physical inventory sitting in their warehouses might be completely obsolete, meaning it is incorrectly overvalued on the balance sheet. Remember, the auditor isn't there to help them sell the old phones. The auditor is there to test the inventory valuation assertion.
Here is another brilliant example featuring a multinational company called Globalized Ltd. Let's say they suffer a massive chemical leak or maybe a huge cybersecurity breach. The business risk is frankly staggering. We're talking reputational destruction, lost customers, massive operational downtime. But again, funnel that down for me. The audit risk is that the company is about to face massive incoming lawsuits and regulatory fines that management might conveniently forget to disclose. So the audit risk is unrecorded contingent liabilities and a lack of required disclosures in the financial statements. Do you see how we connect that chaotic operational disaster to one very specific line item on the balance sheet?
Let's wrap up with Section 5, Common Student Mistakes. Here is how you avoid the examiner's traps.
These are the classic traps students fall into. First, confusing who actually owns the risk. If a case study asks for management's response to an issue, do not give an auditor a substantive testing procedure. Remember, management manages the business, auditors test the numbers. Second, assuming that every single business risk automatically becomes an audit risk, it simply doesn't. If a company has a business risk of, say, low employee morale, well, that rarely translates directly into a material misstatement on the balance sheet. You absolutely have to find the financial link. And third, giving vague answers. Please, don't just write, "The audit risk is high." You must link the broader business strategy directly to a specific financial reporting assertion, exactly like we just did with CellTalk's obsolete inventory valuation.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. When you sit down with your very next exam case study, look closely at the required section and ask yourself, which hat am I wearing right now? Are you the CEO looking out the window at a stormy market, desperately trying to keep the company afloat? Or are you the independent auditor, looking down at the financial statements with a magnifying glass, hunting for misstatements? Mastering that dual perspective is the ultimate key to mastering risk. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep that structured mindset sharp.